Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History Podcast. Our new series, 10 Questions, where we delve into a major historical topic and deal with it in 10 major questions. In this episode, we are going to deal with Babylon, the still point of the turning world. So we start with the most obvious question: where is Babylon located? Where it is the middle of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and the Euphrates come close to connecting. The Euphrates is the more important of the two cities. It's a city in the south. It's a river in the south. And the Tigris is the swifter, harder to canal, harder to navigate river in the north. So in the two in history, it's the Euphrates that's the more important. And in Mesopotamia, they don't connect. And in the ancient world, now they do, because of all the silt that has been deposited over thousands of years. But in the ancient world, they didn't connect. They flowed into the Persian Gulf separately. So the place where they came kind of closest to meeting, in the middle, was a place that was natural for people to meet for trade. If you wanted to cross over the rivers, that's where you would want to go. If you wanted to go north or south, that's where you would meet up with people. Why go all the way to the north when you can meet up with them halfway? They could come halfway down, you could go halfway up. And so there has been a major city, a major population center here in the middle of Mesopotamia since the founding of Babylon. It's Babylon. For the Greeks, it was Ctesiphon. For the Arabs, it will be Baghdad. There's a major capital city right there. It will also become a hub of east and west trade, of trade going from Europe to India or China, or from China and India and Central Asia to the Middle East, to Europe. So it's a natural place for people to meet. So what is Babylon's defining feature? Its size. It is the first cosmopolitan city. And cosmopolitan is a city of the universe. Cosmo, universe, pole, city, at the end of the. It's a city of the universe. So who lives there? Everybody lives there. Everybody. It's massive. All the different people. Not everyone who lives in Babylon are Babylonians. In fact, most people who live in Babylon aren't originally Babylonians. They're immigrants from other parts of Mesopotamia, or even farther afield, from Egypt, from Europe, from India. So it's massive. Its defining feature is massive. 250,000 people. That is 10 times the size of Ur and Uruk, which are large cities. So it's 25 times the size of a typical town. So people who go to Babylon, and you can see this in the Old Testament, you see this when Hebrews go to Babylon and they come back, there is nothing else like it. They're at once amazed by it and horrified by it at the same time. It's New York to Midwesterners who have never been off the farm in Kansas. There's a song after World War I called "How Do You Keep Them on the Farm When They've Seen Paris?" And that was the idea, is they've seen Paris, they've seen New York. How are you going to keep them in Kansas? Their minds are going to be blown by it. It's too big. There's nothing else like it. And that is the emphasis I need to kind of get you to understand. That in the world of even settled people, so nomads have no cities. They wander around from place to place. Those who have horses wander farther afield and quicker. Those who wander on their feet live in small communities, 500, 1,000 people tops. These people live in a small village of a few hundred to a couple of thousand people. Maybe they live on the outskirts of a city that's about 5,000 people. 5,000 people, you still know everybody, more or less, at least by sight. It's a college town. It's a good college town, right? Ur and Uruk, and a couple of cities like it were 25,000 people. At that point, you don't know everybody. At that point, you might never go to a certain part of town. It's big, but you could walk it. You could get from one place to the other. That's, but you probably don't. You have your neighborhood, you have your community, you have the people around you that look like you, that speak like you, that eat like you, that have the same holidays, worship the same gods, everybody's kind of the same. There might be some foreigners, some immigrants in a certain part of the city, but for the most part, everybody you know, everybody you hang out with is like you, and it's comprehensible. It's big, but it's comprehensible. Babylon is beyond that. Babylon is mind-blowing. You can't walk from one end of Babylon to the other. It's too many people. It's too much stuff. The walls are measured in tens of miles long. People aren't like you in Babylon. They're all immigrants. So there's all these different languages, all these different customs, all these different smells, all these different foods. It's New York. Queens today, but it would have been New York below, Houston in the 19th century. It's just a mass of people. And so what's the advantage of this? What is the advantage of Babylon's defining feature? Its diversity. There's people from all over Mesopotamia and even farther around. So you get this mixture of culture and of gods and of behaviors and of knowledge and of skills and of ideas. You're a blacksmith and you're in your little town and you're hammering away and you're making horseshoes and things are good and you're making little collars for goats, you're making little bells for sheep and things are fine. And you're like, I want to be better than this. I want to be bigger than this. I'm going to go to Babylon. I'm a big shot. And people will tell you, dude, you should go to Babylon. You'd make lots of money. You're great. You're great as a blacksmith. So you go to Babylon, right? You go up the river. There's not one blacksmith anymore. There's 12. There's 15. There's 30. There might be 12 in the neighborhood you decide to settle in. And you look at them, and they're cooking hotter than you've ever cooked before. Their anvils are bigger than you've ever had. They've got different kinds of hammers instead of just one. They've got tongs, and they're doing things double-handed. They're using both hands, right and the left. And you're like, I've never done that before. I don't know what the hell that is. Oh my God. Nobody's going to buy my stuff. Because now there's competition. Now there's more people. There's a bigger market. And your skills have to get better if you're going to make it. The idea, like, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. Well, that's Babylon. If you can make it in Babylon, you can make it anywhere. Because the competition is cutthroat. No one's going to buy from you. Little dinky dude who was good in the sticks. No. They're going to the best of the best. And so the heat and the fires are amazing. And so what do? Well, you could open up a shop, and in the end you fail. And you go home as a failure. Or you go to one of these super blacksmiths and you say, teach me. Make me as good as you. Tell me what you know. Say, sure, but you got to pay me. You got to work for me. I'm not going to do it for free. You're my competition. And so now it's education. Now it's a mentorship. You're paying somebody. You're working for somebody for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 7 years. It's not quite indentured servitude, and it's definitely not slavery. But it's it's not a partnership because it's not equal at all. But it's apprenticeship. It's an apprenticeship. You're paying for the knowledge, but what you're learning is Babylonian skills that have been mixed from all over the place. You're using metals that came from far in the north, in the Hittite areas, a place you've never even heard about before. You're getting glass from the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians are getting it from Europe. You've never heard of Europe. You don't know where that is. But you got these glass beads that you can melt down and turn into windows. You can turn into things that you've never seen before. And so knowledge and skills and ideas are all mixing. That's the advantage of diversity. It's the mixture, and it makes you better. Babylon is the most advanced place on earth until we get to the Greeks, who will conquer Babylon. For the rest of this part, for part 1 of our class, for the ancient Mesopotamian world, Babylon is always, even when things go badly for Babylon, always the most advanced place on earth. They have cuneiform writing, because you have all this knowledge, you have all this people buying and selling stuff. You need a way of keeping records. You have all these gods who are asking for different kinds of sacrifice. You got to write this stuff down, and so you get cuneiform. It starts as a pictorial language, like you would literally draw a cow, and you would draw 5 cows, meaning you have 5 cows. Well, that takes a long time, and so what happens is people are lazy, and so they start using just they drop off the legs, then they drop off the body, and so it's just a head. But they don't want to draw the head in things, so then it becomes just a triangle with a dot in it, meaning the eye, and you're like, okay, or it's a triangle with a dot in the middle of it, but 2 lines that pop out of the top of that triangle. Those are the horns, right? And you have writing. And so, but you have a problem. It no longer looks like the thing it used to look like. So now you need literacy. You need people to learn how to read what those symbols mean. Because those symbols don't look like what they look like originally. Because people are lazy, so they're shortcutting it. You know, just like you don't write laugh out loud, right? LOL. Well, if you don't know what LOL is, and in the early days, I don't know if you've ever had this, but in the early days we used to laugh at this because like parents would write LOL because they thought it meant love you lots. You're like, ha, 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 ha. You'd be like, Aunt Sally died, and your mom would respond to LOL. You'd be like, oh my God, what do you mean LOL? Why are you laughing? Aunt Sally just died. And they're like, oh, I thought it meant love you lots. I was thinking about you. And you're like, you need to be educated. So you need education now. Once you get writing, you need education to teach people how to read and then how to write. You get the lunar calendar, which is better farming. Because right now, I am literally doing this lecture. It is January and it is 62 degrees outside. So if you're a farmer, you might go, whoa, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start farming. I'm going to plant my seeds. I'm going to get ahead of the curve, because if it's good weather and I'm the first people to plant, then I have a advantage at the market because I get to harvest sooner. I'll be able to sell my stuff for more. Okay, but what's going to happen? What's going to happen is in a week, it's going to be 10 degrees. There's going to be 6 inches of snow on the ground. So all your seeds that you plant are going to freeze. They're all going to die. So what the lunar calendar does is tell you, wait, don't worry about the weather. Count something that's steady, the moon. The moon has phases. It takes 29 days to go through its phases. Do 3 of those. Do 3 of those after the winter solstice. Right? The day that there's an equal amount of light and an equal amount of night. After the solstice, wait 3 full moons, then start planting. And people do that. It doesn't snow, it doesn't freeze, except in rare occasions, and boom, it's more successful farming. Bronze tools. Bronze is a mixture of copper and tin. Copper's too malleable, it's too soft to do hard work with. It's not good as a weapon. It bends. It's too soft. So you put tin in it. But where does tin come from? It comes from a different place than copper is. So someone had to put them together and go, oh, look at what happens. But in Babylon, you can now teach that. Oh, if you take this, but you can't then make it equal, right? It's got to be this percentage to that percentage. Otherwise, you mess it up. So you have to teach all this. Later on, there's the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. How do you get water that flows down to flow up? The Hanging Gardens of Babylon will be 75 feet tall, about 7 stories, 7 to 8 stories. How do you get water to the top of that? Water flows down. It flows with gravity, not against it. So you have to have engineering, and you have to teach that engineering, and you have to play with it, and you have to experiment with it. And that doesn't happen in a small, tiny town, because there's no money for that. There's not the time for that. There's not the investment for that. It's not a surprise. Skyscrapers happen in big cities. Chicago, New York, London. The Eiffel Tower was not built in Kansas. It was built in Paris. It's not a surprise. And so that diversity is a huge advantage. So what's a disadvantage of Babylon's defining feature? What's a disadvantage of Babylon being so huge? Well, there's the Tower of Babel. If you're looking at the video, there's the video of the Tower of Babel. There's a painting of the Tower of Babel, the old Hebrew Old Testament story. And the answer is diversity. Diversity is the problem. You have people from all over Mesopotamia, from Egypt, from Europe, from India. It's a mess. Everybody's living by different rules. They have different foods. They have different customs. They have different languages. How do they even communicate? That's the story of the Tower of Babel. That's why Babel means to speak incoherently. You're speaking. You think you're understood. People don't understand you. There's different gods. There's different behaviors. And who's right? Everybody thinks they're right. I have never met anybody who thought their God was the wrong God. Nobody. Nobody ever looked at me and went, you know what, I think my God is the wrong God. Because if they think that, they go and find a different God. Right? Nobody thinks their customs are wrong. That their way of eating is wrong. That their foods that they like are wrong. That they're the wrong people. They look at other people and say, you're wrong. Act like me. So who's right? There's who? Nobody knows. In this mass of 250,000 people, nobody knows. So you have this cultural competition of everybody competing with each other over who's right and who's wrong. And there's a chauvinism to this, and there's a cultural hierarchy to this. I'm better than you. Our people are better than your people. So if you go into your Old Testament, Babylon is everywhere. The Hebrews are both enamored by it and horrified by it. They're enamored with it because they keep going to Babylon. Now, this is before the Babylonian captivity. But it's like Vegas. People are both enamored with it. Oh, it's Vegas, man. And what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And it's the only place like it. But they're also horrified. You mean there are prostitutes on street corners? You mean people doing heroin in the middle of the street? You mean you could lose your entire child's college fund in one roll of the dice? That's terrible. That's horrible. Who would do that? So they're at once enamored with it. It's big. It's sexy. It builds towers that can knock on God's front door. There's nothing in the lands of the Hebrews that can do that. Nothing. But they're horrified by it too. It's too big. Knocking on God's front door, you shouldn't be knocking on God's front door. There's too many people. There's too many voices. In the land of the Hebrews, you know what everybody speaks? Hebrew. You know what God they worship? The Hebrew God. You go to Babylon, there's 200 gods. And only 12 of them, 15 of them are Babylonian gods. You've got all these other people with gods. And this is even before the captivity in 585, when the Hebrews are made slaves by Nebuchadnezzar and the Neo-Babylonians. At that point, they're really horrified by Babylon, right? I mean, they might be enamored with it because it's sexy, it's strong, it's victorious. But also, it's the slaver, it's the conqueror, it's a destroyer of the temple. So we see this with the prophets all the time. The prophets are constantly telling people, stop acting like the Babylonians. Well, why would you have to tell people to stop doing something? Unless they're doing it and they're enjoying it, right? So if the prophets keep saying, stop acting like the Babylonians, people like acting like the Babylonians. So diversity is the great advantage of Babylon, but it's also the great disadvantage of it too. I mean, take a look at Hallmark Christmas movies. It's predictably monocultural. Look at, if you're on the video, you have to see this. If not, you kind of got to Google this. But if you take a look at Hallmark Christmas movie posters, look at them. There's no kids. There's white and red outfits in every photo. It's a man and a woman, an adult man and a woman. Some of them, they're a little older. They're in their 40s, maybe early 50s. But most of them are in their 20s, maybe early 30s. Right? They're all in white or red. Right? They're all white people. There's no black or brown people in any of these posters from the Hallmark movies from I think this is 2021 I took this from. There's a Christmas tree, and a lot of them. Christmas is in the title. There's Christmas cookies. There's every Christmas has a story. There's the 9 Lives of Christmas. There's if you like Christmas, if you love Christmas, say it to Christmas. Right? A heavenly Christmas with love at Christmas. Right? And they're smiling, happy Caucasian people who you know are going to end up in a relationship together. Right? And then do a search for children's Christmas movies. And there's kids in the posters. There's Macaulay Culkin. There's the Grinch. There's Chevy Chase being electrocuted in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. There's old stuff. There's black people, because black people have Christmas too. There's black people's movies about Christmas. There's horror movies. Scrooge, for example. There's violence, and there's meanness, and there's a different color palette. None of these posters look alike. None of them. There's greens, and there's reds, and there's whites, and there's blues, but there's also Muppets. And some are old, and some are painted, and some are pictures, and some are photographs. And there's music. There's just flat out music. Andy Williams' Christmas. Emmett Otter's Jug Band. White Christmas, right? A Charlie Brown's Christmas. There's music. There's Muppets. And there's Schwarzenegger. There's Arnold Schwarzenegger doing Jingle All the Way. It's chaos. Whereas Hallmark Christmas movies are predictably monocultural. You could put them on. You know who's in them. You know how it's going to go. It's safety. It's warmth. It's predictability. They all look the same. Children Christmas movies are chaos. There's chaotic diversity in them. And some people like that chaos. And a lot of people don't like that chaos. Which brings us to Hammurabi's problem. What is Hammurabi's problem? Hammurabi is the 6th king of Babylon. He's not the first, because when Babylon starts, it's not the biggest place in the whole wide world. But by him, it is. By him, it's the 6th. He's the 6th king. We're talking around a century and a half since Babylon has started. Those numbers are just ballpark. I don't have them in front of me, but the idea is time has passed. Babylon has grown. Babylon is a thing now. Babylon is kind of Babylon. And he has a problem. And that problem is a heterogeneous society looks like it's coming apart. America always looks like it's coming apart. Why? Because it's a nation of immigrants, of enslaved peoples, of formerly enslaved peoples, of defeated previous cultures of the Native Americans. It's got foreigners who are absorbed into the culture. It's got foreigners who are not absorbed into the culture. And they're all doing their own thing. They're all speaking their own languages. Right now in Queens, 100 and whatever, 20. It used to be 108, but there's more now. But Houston is the same way. There's 120 different languages being spoken right now. In Queens, New York, in Houston. Nobody looks at that and says, stability. Heterogeneous societies look like they're coming apart. So Hammurabi looks at his domain and goes, oh my God, nobody gets along. The Tower of Babel story is all about how nobody got along in the end. They all speaking different languages. Nobody can work together. So he says there needs to be a standard of rules. There needs to be one person, one way of doing things that everybody agrees on, that everyone can follow. And what is the answer to his question? He is going to make the rules. The Code of Hammurabi, the first written law code, it is the idea that the king makes the rules. And that's new. Previous kings built walls. Previous kings collected taxes. Previous kings did not make rules. Society made the rules. Remember, we talked about this in the nomadic peoples. Priests might make some rules because you had to do sacrificing, right? There are rules about paying taxes. That's a king's rule. But now, social rules, how you will behave. What is the right temperature to cook meat at? Do you get a refund if the product you buy is not good enough, if it breaks too soon? Who's going to make those rules? Government is going to make those rules. The king is going to make those rules. And he's going to write it down so you all can know it. Because if you go, I didn't know, you point down in the middle of your town square and say, there it is. It was right there. And they don't change. They're written down so they don't change. You can't just cross it out. You just can't update it. You have to start from scratch. So the rules don't change. So the 282 rules of Hammurabi are going to be the 282 rules for a long time. So how does Hammurabi's code work? Well, you write it down, and if you're on the video, you're going to see in the Louvre, they literally have Hammurabi's code. It's on a pillar. It's all written down. So now notice you have to be literate, and only maybe 5% of people are literate. But the idea is you can hire somebody who is literate to tell it to you, right? To be like, you know what? Does Rule 14, I have a problem with my merchant. He sold me this good and it broke. Does Rule 14 apply to it? And the guy goes, yeah, Rule 14 says, buyer beware. Like, you should have picked a better guy. Ah, man. All right. But, what are you going to do? Argue? That's what the rule says. Buyer beware. So never buy it from that company again. And you've done this all the time, right? You buy something, it's junk. You're like, I'm never buying from this company again. And I'm going to tell everybody not to buy from them. So that's as old as Hammurabi. So how does this code work? Well, you kind of know, and children know this. You know it from the Hebrew Bible as an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That's not exactly what it is. So let's explain it. The punishment is equal to your social rank. There's a formula, and that formula is who you are multiplied by what you did, divided by who you did it to. So who you are you a noble person? Are you a citizen? Are you a slave? What did you do? The worse the crime, the bigger the punishment's going to be. And then who did you do it to? Did you do it to someone who's equal to you, above you, or below you? Because if you did it to someone who's equal to you, it's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You're equals. So they get to exact the same punishment from you. The revenge is exact. It's the same. But only if you are of the same social rank. So, if a noble person punches out the front teeth of another noble person, that noble person has the right to punch out the same two teeth, to have removed the same two teeth that they lost. But, let's say you're at a bar, you're with your noble homeboy, you're watching a football game, you like different teams, and you're joshing, and you're a little drunk, and you go to punch your friend. Like, he said something that's just mean, and you go to punch your friend, and his slave comes in between. His slave sees it happening, doesn't lay a finger on you, but just puts his face in the way of your fist. You knock out two front teeth. Is the slave going to get to knock out the two front teeth? Of you? No, not at all. Why? Because the slave is worth a lot less in society. You're a noble. You're important. The slave's not important. But does a slave have value? Yes, a slave does have value. A slave has value to the noble person. So something has to be done. And this is the innovation, that noble person who ended up inadvertently punching the slave in the face has to pay something, has to do something, has to give restitution, has to give a reparation. They have to admit they've done something wrong. They didn't have to do that before. They're nobles. They do whatever the F they want. So what are they going to do? Well, they're rich. They're important. They have money. So what are they going to do? They're going to pay a fine. They're going to pay something they have. That makes sense. So they're going to pay, say, $100 a tooth. Now, what happens if the same thing happens? I miss my friend. He dodges. I punch the guy behind him. That guy is a citizen. He's a regular old farmer. He's a blacksmith. He's Bill the blacksmith. Hey, I'm Bill the blacksmith. I get punched in the face. Ow! You knock out Bill's teeth. Now, is Bill a noble person? No. So you're going to lose your 2 teeth? No. Please. But Bill is not a slave either. What is his teeth worth? His teeth are obviously worth more. You've obviously done something wrong. He has a right to restitution, and so it's $500 a tooth. It's not the same punishment, but it's still a punishment. Now, what if it's the reverse? You're there, you're joshing with your friend, you're saying mean things, because of course you're saying mean things, right? And upset for his noble person, the slave punches you in the face, right? Knocks out a tooth. Don't you talk about my noble that way. Punches you in the face, right? Does the slave have any money to pay a fine? No. Is the slave equal? No. So the punishment has to be harsher. Now, it's probably going to be execution. Why? Because there's a lot of slaves, and you can't allow slaves to think they could get away with hurting the noble people. Noble people are maybe 1 to 2% of the population. If poor people think they can revolt and get away with it, then they might revolt and get away with it. If slaves think they could revolt and get away with it, they'll revolt and get away with it. So you have to, so it's not the slave himself, it's the symbolism to the other slaves. So a slave who punches out the tooth of a noble dies, gets executed. To tell all the other slaves, don't you be punching noble people. But what if a slave in the exact same situation says, well, I can't punch a noble person, I don't want to die, but I can't let him just insult my master that way, my noble guy, so what am I going to do? I'm going to punch his slave, and punches Joe's slave in the face. Joe's slave, which is carrying the coats, he has, he's holding the beer, because the noble said, oh, hold my beer, right? Who's going to hold his beer? Like we say this, hold my beer, like there's somebody standing right there. Well, in ancient Babylon, there was a slave standing right there. All right, master, I got your slave. I got your beer. Thank you very much. All right? That's his job, literally to be the beer holder. Well, he gets punched in the face, he loses a tooth. What's the punishment? Bill's slave loses a tooth, the same exact tooth, not a better tooth, not a different tooth, the same exact tooth. Why? Because a slave is equal to another slave. Who did it? A slave. What they did, knocked out a tooth. Who they did to? Another slave. So the punishment is the same. It's not different just because they're a slave. It's the action, it's the person, the action, the recipient, the victim. So the rich, who are more important, get protected from the poor, who are more numerous. While the poor, who get harsher treatments, finally get some protection from the rich, who have to admit that they did wrong and finally pay some restitution. Because think about it. You can't make a rich person in an age where there are no courts, right, do something. So you live next door to a really rich guy, right? And his son is super entitled and they're selfish, right? And one day they're walking by your house and the kid sees your pig, your favorite pig, and he looks at his friends and says, watch this, and stabs the pig, right? Kills your pig. Are you out money? Yeah, you're out money. You can't sell that pig. You can't eat that pig. You're out money. Okay, how are you going to get restitution? Where are you going to go? Well, you're going to go march up to your noble neighbor, right? You're going to go tell him what for, except he's got big gates and a fence that's locked from the inside. Well, you're going to climb over that fence. Well, now you're trespassing. But let's say you could get away with that. You're going to march up to his front door. You're going to knock. Boom, 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 boom. I want my money for my pig. Answering that door. At best, a servant. At worst, a bodyguard. Or 3. Who are paid to make sure you never get close to the rich, important person. Even though he's a neighbor. Now, if you're lucky, they will just pick your ass up, march you to the gate, throw you out of it, and say, don't come back here no more. Or they might beat you up and kick you out. And what are you going to do about that? Nothing. So you have to stew. You have to sit there, and every day you have to watch that kid walk by as he gives you a big middle finger, being like, ha, 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 you can't touch me. Well, that anger that you're feeling is going to rip a society apart. If the rich people can get away with whatever they want without punishment, without any punishment, that, remember, 95% of people are not rich. They're poor. The only reason there are rich people are because poor people let them live. French Revolution, Russian Revolution, what do? You kill the rich people, you take their money, and you give it to the people. Boom, done. Done. Should anybody have $100 billion? Why does he have $100 billion? Because poor people allow them to be worth $100 billion. You can kill that rich person, take their stocks, give it to people. Boom. Done. And you go, well, that's chaos. That's not chaos. That's just the poor people killing the rich people and taking their stuff, which they can do because there's more of them. So you have to understand, the Code of Hammurabi is very clear on this, but the Greeks are too, and the Romans are too, and the Egyptians are too. The rich people always know they're outnumbered, and they're always afraid of that. And so Hammurabi looks at this and says there has to be punishment for rich people. They can't just get away with it. Otherwise, one day, the citizens and the slaves are not going to take it anymore. And they're just going to revolt, and they're going to murder all the rich people. And who's the richest of them all? The king. That's exactly what happened to the French king in the French Revolution. They murdered him. They took his palace, the Louvre, and turned it into a museum. So, for the first time, legally, poor people have a recourse. They can go get a lawyer. And by lawyer means someone who could read the law. And they could essentially sue. They could go to a local government official who's a representative of the king, and they could say, this guy owes me money for a pig. And the local representative will bring that rich guy in, bring in his son, ask a bunch of questions. That guy is now a judge because he's going to determine right or wrong. Now, here's the thing. Who is that judge? That judge is employed by the king. But that judge is also literate. That judge needs to know the law. That judge needs to know what the king says about the law and what he wants the law to be. And so that judge is probably a noble person. Right? He's a cousin. He's a brother-in-law. He knows the rich guy. And he knows his nephew's a jerk who killed the pig. So he knows the nephew killed the pig. Right? Now, ordinarily you might say, well, that guy's not going to be fair. Uh-huh. But it's written right there from Hammurabi what the punishment is. Rich guy killed the pig. He killed a citizen's pig, which means he owes restitution. Does he owe him another pig? No. It'd be nice if he did it, but he doesn't owe him another pig. He owes him, let's say a pig is worth $5,000. He owes him $1,000, right? And you may go, well, that's not fair. Well, there is no fairness in this. There's no equality. The citizen does not think of it as equal. Fairness is getting something. He admits he's wrong. His son knows he's wrong, and I get something out of it. Now, would it be nice? And the judge probably says, why don't you give him a pig? It would be nice to give him a pig. Right? Your neighbors. But the law says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth if you're of the same social class. They're not of the same social class, so he gets a lesser thing. But remember, the Semitic languages of this time do not have the word equality in them. There's no concept of it. So just having some form of restitution that poor people can employ is huge improvement on their lives. What about women? Well, women are a problem. Not in life, but in the law, in Hammurabi's law. In Hammurabi's time, women are a problem. Why are women a problem legally? Well, because nobody wants to punish them like a man. Remember, this whole thing is equal. It's the punishment is the same. Nobody wants to do that, and yet women do bad things. They do commit crimes, right? In a fight, they pull the hair out of another woman's top of her hair, right? Big clump, right? Should that happen to the woman who did it? Technically, yes, but does anyone want to do that? Does anyone want to punish women the same way as men? No, we still don't. Even today, women are punished less severely than men are, even if it's the same crime. Society just doesn't want to punish women like men. But women need to be held to account. They do bad things. They do things. So how are you going to treat them? Are you going to have a whole separate law code just for women? That's inefficient. So there's an answer. And there's a natural answer. There's an answer everybody knows and everybody understands. And the answer is that women are not as important as men. They're not as responsible as men. They're not men. They're not adults in a way of thinking about independent people who are capable of making their own decisions. Is there another group of people like that who we don't want to punish the same way as adults? Yeah. They're treated like children. They're not responsible for their actions. They need protections from men. Think about it. We do this all the time, right? We do this all the time. Where children do bad things. I never understand the people who tell me children are innocent and they're beautiful and they're innocent and they've never done anything wrong, obviously do not have children. Children lie all the time. They steal. Now, you may blame Wawa for that. You know, they have the counters that are high. Well, if you're a little kid, you're looking right at the candy. You're 4. The candy is right there. And the adult on the other side of the counter can't see you. So whoop, 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 whoop. Here's some York Peppermint Baddies. Here's some Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. Right? Here's a lollipop. Right? And if you're an adult who lives in New Jersey and has had small kids, you know either you have to really monitor them while you're paying, or you're going to get to your car and suddenly he's going to have a blow pop. And you're going to be like, where did that come from? He just took it. Your kid just took it. Now, are you going to put your kid in jail? Oh, no, nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. You're not going to call the cops on the shoplifting 5-year-old. And people who do, they're like, well, I have to call the cops. He's stealing, right? The cops are going to show up and be like, what are you talking about? And then it's going to be written up in the paper. And what are the comments from the society going to be? From the local town people going to be? Are you people crazy? Why are you bringing out the cops on a 5-year-old? In fact, we use this in American society, in 21st century American society, as an example of racism. Why do white kids not get in trouble, but black kids do? Why do they call cops on black kids and brown kids, but not on white kids? It's that kind of thing. Because the idea was, they shouldn't, yes, they should get a talking to. Yes, they should be told they're wrong. But we shouldn't involve the cops. We shouldn't involve prison. We shouldn't involve the courts. They're 5. They're 6. They're 7. And so that's the treatment of women. They're not property. And this is the big thing, because you will hear this. You will still hear this. This became a big thing in the 60s because there was no, you have to understand, history had no women involved. None. Right? There might have been Nefertiti, and then there was Cleopatra. as wife of as mistress of Caesar and wife of Mark Antony, right? She played a secondary role. You have Mary, mother of Jesus, and Mary Magdalene, right? And then you'd have nothing to like Joan of Arc, you know. And she had to wait till like the 1920s to become a saint of France. Like there are no women in history in the pre-1960s. So when women started becoming historians and college started becoming liberal and changing, one of the first things they said is like, let's find the women. Where are the women in history? They're half the population. How can they not be in history? Right? And so one of the questions was, how are women treated? The answer they pick is like property. Because it was easy. It was like, they're not citizens, so they must be property. But it's just not true, because you can't sell your wife the way you can sell your land, your furniture, your slave. You can't do that. Your wife has protections. The Code of Hammurabi is going to give her protections. But also, she has protections from her own family. You treat your wife badly, she's going to go tell your father-in-law, who's going to tell his sons, who, and if you've ever seen The Godfather, you know this, they show up at your door at 3 a.m. wanting to take you out for a drink. And you're like, wow, you guys never wanted to include me before. And they're like, yeah, man, we want to take you out now. Hey, sis, don't wait up. Now, are they going to kill you? No, they're your brothers-in-law. You're the father of their nieces and nephews. You're their wife. You're their sister's husband. But they're going to make sure you know you don't get to treat their sister like property. Women have rights. They're just not equal rights to men. They're not independent rights. They're children. They're treated like children. So, what is the effect of this? The effect is women become wards of their fathers and their husbands. Their fathers and their husbands are responsible for whether or not they do bad things. This, if you want to put it into the modern context, or even in like Jane Austen and Little Women, Louisa May Alcott, this is where honor killings come in. That's where fathers are responsible for their daughter's sexuality. So that's Romeo and Juliet. Now Juliet gets married. And then she has sex. So her sex is okay. The priest married her. But she doesn't tell her father she's doing that. She doesn't tell her father, oh, I got married and then I had sex. Even though it's perfectly fine. The priest did it. She won't ever admit to him that she did it. Why? Because it will make him look terrible. He didn't have a say in it. He didn't choose for her. He didn't negotiate. He would not have picked Romeo. She picked Romeo. Now, in a comedy, in a Shakespearean comedy, all would have worked out and everyone would have laughed at the end and been like, oh, of course, Romeo and you were meant to be together. But this is a tragedy, so everybody dies. But fathers and husbands become responsible for women's actions. And in several societies, I'm thinking of Turkish immigrant societies in Sweden, where this is my field, is Sweden, and so I know about this kind of stuff, is that you get a series of immigrant murders of their daughters. Why? Because the daughters are 15, 16, 17, 18. They start hanging out with Swedish boys. They're Swedish. They speak Swedish. They've lived their entire lives in Sweden. And so they do what comes naturally to a 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old girl with a 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old boy. But the father's friends are all like, Mahmoud, your daughter. Can't control your daughter. You have no power. They're just, the kids today, they don't listen to their parents. You're just weak. And so to get back power, these fathers murder their daughters. And a lot of times with the help of their wives. Because the wives are humiliated too. Their daughter isn't listening. Their daughter isn't responsible. Their daughter isn't following the rules. So so she's humiliated as well. So women become wards of their fathers and husbands. But women maintain protections over their body, just like we talked about with nomads. They have a right to pick who they marry. They have a right to, not so much to pick, but to veto. Right? They don't have to veto. They don't have to marry somebody they don't want to marry. But lots of people are going to have a say. Their aunties are going to have a say. Their parents are going to have a say. Their friends' parents are going to be like, well, what do you think about putting, X and Y together, right? They have a right to be a mother. You may go, well, what do you mean? Well, that's a limitation on men. Who's responsible for a woman getting pregnant? A man is. Now, you have to understand, they thought of this like farmers thought of things, right? So you got to put the seed in the earth for things to grow. So if you're not putting the seed in the earth, things aren't going to grow. So a man has to have sex with his wife. A man has to try to help her get pregnant so she can be a mother, which means men can't disappear on a long trade mission to Sumer. They can't join the king in war to Egypt, right? They have to do their husbandly duties first. Otherwise, she can divorce him, which is a power women have. Women can divorce their husbands. Now, if she has children and none of those children are sons capable of inheriting the property, inheriting the business, he has a right to divorce his wife in order to marry somebody who he could have sons with. Because the idea, and you know this from your Henry VIII stuff, is getting pregnant is the man's responsibility. And you hear that, the Springsteen's song, The River, has a line where Springsteen as a man is like, and then I got Mary pregnant. Like, I did it. Mary wasn't getting pregnant on her own. I did it. A man gets a woman pregnant. That's the way they thought about it. But what grows is a woman's responsibility. Now we know science tells us that's not true, but they didn't know this. And so what grows? Is it healthy? Is it a boy? Is a woman's responsibility. And she gets the praise or the blame. And we do this now too. Let's be honest. The moment you get pregnant, you're not allowed to drink anymore. You can't smoke anymore, right? Because you're responsible, if you're a woman, for how that baby turns out. God forbid you show up at a bar 6-8 months pregnant. And God forbid you ask for a beer. People are going to lose their mind. Your waitress is definitely going to be like, are you sure? Now, is one beer going to hurt your kid? No. Is one cigarette going to hurt your kid? No. But notice the society suddenly becomes very protective and very interested in telling women what they can put into their bodies once they start showing. So, women have a right to be a mother. Women have a right to their own money, a dowry. Now remember, they're wards of their husbands or their fathers, right? So where does that money come from? That money comes from their father. When they get married, he gives a dowry. Now that dowry goes to the husband, but it's not his money. Remember, women are children, so it's like having a bank account that they can't draw on. They have to go to their husbands to get money out of that account. But it is theirs. And should he divorce her, he gets to take that money. It's her money. It's not his money. He can't gamble it away. He can't now. Do men try to do this? Do men do this? Sure. Remember, in history, there's never a no. There's always an example. And so, but the idea, the legal issue is that it's their money. They have independent money that they can use on them. And all of this is limitations on male behavior. Can they go off to war? Not if your wife wants to have babies. Can you go do a big trade thing that's going to take you away for 2 years? Not if your wife wants babies. Can you just spend your wife's money on your Shark Tank idea? No, can't touch it. So women have rights. They don't have independence, but they have rights. They're treated like children. And all of this puts responsibilities on men. It puts limitations on men. Again, why women are not property. Because I own a house, I own a backyard, there is no limits on what almost no limits on what I can do with that property. I want to dig a big hole and stand in it while I spritz myself with a hose. I can do that. Nobody can tell me I can't do that. Hey, I'm a man. It's my property. And so what these things do is put limitations on how men can act. They're social, they're legal, they're economic, they're biological, but there are limits. Okay, so what is the defining feature of warfare in this time? Well, we get the development of the first superweapon. The defining feature of this first superweapon is that it's super, super expensive. It's the chariot. The chariot revolution is the first superweapon, around 2000 BCE. And it's a superweapon. And why? What makes it a superweapon? Well, first is it's expensive. Only rich people can afford them. Only rich people could afford the horses that were necessary. Notice these are not work horses. These are special horses just for chariot racing and war chariots. These horses need lots of land to graze. You can't use that for farming. It has to be grass. Mesopotamia doesn't have grass. It has mud. So you have to import the seeds from Central Asia. You have to make 10 acres, 20 acres, 100 acres look like Central Asia. That takes money and work. If any of you have ever owned a lawn, you know how much water you need? You know how much work you need to make sure it doesn't weed so that the grass grows? You need time to train. Training to drive, training to shoot, training to stand in the chariot. Only rich societies can afford to have enough chariots to matter. All right, you have a war and one dude shows up in a chariot. Well, that's useless. You need 20, 50, 100, 200, 1,000. So suddenly only rich people matter and only rich societies matter. That's what happened to the chariots. Because it is a weapon so much better than just a dude with a spear. If you're looking at our video, you're seeing the chariot running over a dude. The two guys up there, the horse pays him no mind. Nobody's looking at him. They're just running him over. The super weapon is so much more powerful than dudes with spears that you stop caring about how big your army is. Stop caring about the dudes with spears. And you see this in the Bible. You see this in Chronicles or Kings, where you see this change, where it goes from how many men Joshua has. Joshua has 7,000 men, or whatever the number is. It's exaggerated anyway. But then it becomes Ahab has 40 chariots. Right? Jehoshaphat has 37 chariots. They don't tell you how many men is in his army. Why? Because they don't matter. The chariots matter. And so what effect does this superweapon have on the Near East? It divides the Near East into a big three. It's a new legitimacy. Oh, you think you're important? Do you have chariots? No, so shut up. Chariots or nothing. This is of nothing, excuse me, but it's or nothing equals military power. I have 50,000 guys. All right, that's great. 1,000 chariots are going to destroy those 50,000 guys and send them running away. So the Near East gets divided into three big superstates. Babylon, which is the leading state of trade and manufactured goods. Egypt, which has the Nile and food and is the richest country. If Babylon is the most advanced place, Egypt is the richest place. And then the Hittites. Now you go, well, wait, who are the Hittites? Why the Hittites? Well, the Hittites are up in Asia Minor. They're up in Anatolia. They're in modern-day Turkey. And they live in the mountains. They have access to the minerals. They have access to the copper, the tin, and later the iron. that's going to make all this stuff. They're the Saudi Arabia of the day. The river valleys are very good at making food, but the rivers, over millions of years of flowing, have washed all their minerals away. That's why the seas are salty. It's all the minerals that have been dissolved into the oceans. So where are you getting the minerals from? You need the minerals from mountains. Well, the mountains are not very good at growing stuff. So the people who live in mountains have always been, will always be poorer than people who don't live in the mountains. But, as you know from West Virginia, it's poor, but it's rich in mineral wealth, in metals, coal and iron and copper. And so the Hittites had a lower cost to compete. Their chariots cost them less because they took the iron, they took the copper, they took the tin, they took later the iron first, kept it for themselves, and all the extra they sold to Egypt, they sold to Babylon. So they're making money, which means they're offsetting the cost of making their own chariots. So Hittite chariots are just as good as Babylonian and Egyptian chariots, but they cost 1/3 the price. So they're able to compete. But what about other small cities? What about other poor people? They can't. Sumer can't compete. Right? Cush can't compete. They're eclipsed. Smaller, poorer people. The Hittites, not the Hittites, the people in Phoenicia, the various people of the desert, like, they don't matter anymore. It's you're one of these big three or you're not. So the world gets divided. Asia, the Middle Eastern world, the Mesopotamian world gets divided into three big superstates: Babylon, Egypt, and the Hittites. And everybody is living in one of those zones until the Bronze Age collapse. The Bronze Age collapse, that happens around 1000 BC, is the first apocalypse. It's the end of an age. It's the end of the Bronze Age. The world gets on the move. Take a look at Exodus, and you'll see the Moses story is exactly this. Something happened in Central Asia. Something climate-related happened that got nomads to go on the move. Those nomads bumped into other nomads looking for food. Those nomads got pushed, and where did they get pushed into? Into settled people's zones, which are worse for food for horses, worse for food for nomads. So they got pushed in looking for food into settled people's zones, which means they burned that stuff down. So settled people got on the move and bumped into other settled people. And every major civilization, from Greece to China, collapsed, is all destroyed. They all die in fire and blood. Every city in Greece is burned except for Athens, which the Athenians will say, hey, look at us, we were so great, no one burned us down. To which everyone else will say, you were so poor, you weren't even worth burning down. But every major civilization is destroyed. Egypt is destroyed by the sea peoples. The Babylon is conquered by a bunch of different peoples. Eventually a group of people known as the Chaldeans will settle there and become the new Babylonians. You get a dark age where the loss of knowledge, the loss of culture, the loss of writing happens. Literally, the Greeks lost how to write. They became illiterate. They became so illiterate they had to reinvent a new form of Greek. This is a trauma to the settled world. And we'll see this again happen at the end of the Classical Age, where Rome, India, and China all collapse at around the same time, within 100 or so, 150 years of each other. They all collapse. So we are living in like the third or the fourth age of civilization, depending on where you want to put markers down. You know, is the Westphalian system a new age? Might be. Is the French Revolution a new age? And industrialization? Might be. So we're in the third or fourth age, kind of like Lord of the Rings, where the story of the Lord of the Rings isn't happening. It's called the third age. So it's a trauma. The Bronze Age collapse is a trauma. And we will pick up with that in our next lecture. Be safe. Take care. Don't let barbarians burn your house down.